How many of y'all get bogged down in some of this stuff in the Torah readings at this point, with all of the instructions of clothing and things of that sort? It's easy to do so, and it's easy. There's so much in here, and I know there's meanings for so many things, and I know I'm just going to scratch on the surface on a few things. But one of the things that comes up in this one is in chapter 28. With all, and we're all dealing with different kinds of burdens and struggles and hardships. Different responsibilities. We carry around with us all sorts of guilt of past pain, fear, and sin, and again, those are just kind of scratching the surface of the kind of burdens that we bear. And some of them are very, very real and significant. Some of them are connected to those tangible things and events, while others, oftentimes, that's the hard part with many burdens. Many of the burdens we put on ourselves are where? In our own head half the time. They can be imagined, they can be just anticipatory, perceived burdens that we place upon ourselves that aren't necessarily connected to anything real or tangible that has happened, but what we are afraid might even happen. So to bear such weights can make for a pretty hard life, right? But what's one of the things that Yeshua said about those things? Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and he'll do what? I'll give you rest. His burden is easy, his yoke is light. But with as challenging as things are, in our own day, just being a pastor or just having to prepare messages and things like that feels like a challenge and a difficulty at times. I can't imagine what the kind of pressure that the high priest would be under, with the significance of the role that he was playing. I can't imagine the burdens that the high priest would have to bear that we read about in this Torah portion. See, much of this Torah portion deals with the priesthood and those things that go toward making their ministry before ADONAI possible. And particularly, we're focusing on the high priest's garments and related things. There's 3 verses, that highlight the kind of things that the high priest is supposed to bear during his service and during his ministry. And it's talking about how the high priest is the one who carries us. But when we look at this in Exodus 12, it's talking about those stones upon his shoulders. Fasten the 2 stones upon the shoulder pieces of the ephod, and to be memorial stones for Bnei Israel. So Aaron is to bear their names before ADONAI on his 2 shoulders as a reminder. So these things are put there upon him that he is supposed to carry, that weight, that responsibility is supposed to be there for him. When you look at some of these depictions of what they may look like, with the 6 names of the tribes on one and 6 names on the other, and how they are then fastened upon the garment. And that's just the bearing the names of this people before ADONAI is just the first kind of weight or responsibility that he bears. Verse 29, it goes on. It says, Aaron will bear the names of Bnei Israel in the breastplate of judgment on his heart whenever he enters the holy place as a continual memorial before ADONAI. Y'all have seen many of those, perhaps. I got these from the Temple Institute, so they can get they have an idea of what they're looking to do. And it struck me, doesn't that look a little low to me? It's supposed to be over his heart, right? Why do you think that is? When they think of the center of someone's emotions and their, what we call the heart, they would often talk about in terms of the bowels, right? The liver, right? So it's appropriate that it may be a little bit lower than how we always picture it in our culture. But that center of the emotional state is a little bit further down than what we're used to. So that kind of threw me off when I first saw that picture. But then there's verse 38. It says, "So it will rest on Aaron's forehead, so that Aaron will bear away the iniquity committed regarding the holy things, which Bnei Israel set apart as all their holy gifts. It is to be always on his forehead, so that they may have favor before Adonai." And this is just one of the pictures that I found from them as well. And it says, "Holy to the Lord" upon it, Kadosh, the Adonai. It says, "Upon his shoulders the high priest bears the names of the 12 tribes of Adonai. Over his heart, in that place of judgment or of hearing, making decisions, the high priest bears the names of Bnei Israel. The crown upon his head, with God's name, with his holiness declared, written upon it, the high priest bears away this iniquity. And what's interesting in all of this is in each verse, the same Hebrew word is used to talk about the bearing of it. It's nasa. You could think of it as NASA, lifting things up into space. But nasa, it's used 654 times in the Old Testament. And it's talking about lifting or bearing up or carrying, taking something to a higher place. But it's also talking about supporting or sustaining or enduring. And we need to be lifted up and strengthened and supported through all of the things that we go through. And it's also talking about taking something away or carrying it off and removing it from you. And 16 times it's also translated with the idea of forgiveness. Why do you think forgiveness is a part of that? Forgiveness, what is he removing from us when he forgives? He's removing our guilt, right? He's removing that sin, that broken relationship. He's removing those things so that we can be restored to him. You see this word all over the place, obviously, 654 times. The first time it's used is in Genesis 4, where Cain comes forth and he hears God's pronouncement for killing his brother. He says, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. I cannot carry this weight upon me because of your judgment. It's too much for me." And that is true, not just for him, isn't it? It's true for all of us. The judgment against sin in our life is too great for any of us to carry or to bear. You also see it in chapter 7 with Noah and the ark and the flood, where it's the waters that increased and lifted Nasa, lifted the ark, supported it, bore it up, carried it off. So on the first one, it's talking about that punishment that's too heavy of a load. In this one, it's actually this means of salvation. In chapter 22, it shows up more than once, but at one point it says, Abraham lifted up his eyes, and behold, there was a ram. What's happening here in chapter 22? Y'all remember? That's the binding of Isaac, right? And many times it's translated, Nasa is one of those moments where you lift up your eyes. Lift up your eyes toward what? Toward the heavens many times, toward God, toward what he has provided for you. It's a way of signifying an act of worship. We're lifting up our eyes to him. And then Exodus 19, it's used of God and what he does for us. He says, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I carried you, or I lifted you, or I bore you up on the eagle's wings and brought you to myself. That is so much of his heart, and his desire is to bear us up, to lift us up into his presence. In Exodus 32, and this is one of those examples of forgiveness. He says, yet now please forgive Nasa, their sin, but if not, even please blot me out. Now this is Moses talking here. So if you can't forgive their sin for what they had done, this is the golden calf type of moment. If you are unwilling to forgive their sin, then take me off the list. I'm not going without the rest of them, in other words. In Leviticus 16, where he's talking about the goat that will carry away all the iniquities of Bnei Israel. What's happening here? Y'all guess? This is that incident on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, where the sin has been transferred over, and then they take that goat out, and he removes them from their presence. Then you also see it a couple of times in Isaiah 53, where he's in many ways just like the goat that has been spoken of. Surely he, in talking of Messiah, has borne our griefs and carried our pains. Or in verse 12, for he has bore the sins of many, and he interceded for the transgressors. This idea of carrying or bearing is a very important connected concept throughout all of the scriptures, and these are just a few of the examples. The high priest is bearing the names of the tribes on his shoulders, and he is acting essentially in this moment as the stand-in, as the representative before Adonai, especially when dealing with that burden of guilt or that burden of sin. He is the representative. He is one man, but he is representing how many? He's representing all of them. All of the tribes, all of the people represented in the one man. Hebrews 7 shows how this works for the high priest as the representative. This is a statement where Yeshua is kind of giving a contrast. Yeshua as Messiah, the sinless one, acting as the high priest in that heavenly tabernacle, that heavenly sanctuary, to the high priest in the earthly tabernacle. This is one of those contrast verses. But it says in Hebrews 7, it says, he has no need to offer up sacrifices day by day like those other Kohanim Gedolim, the other high priests. First for their own sins. This is where he's different. They have to do an offering when they come before the Lord. First they have to offer for their own sins, and then for the sins of the people. For when he offered up himself, he did this once for all. So he's different than the other one. He doesn't have to offer one for his own sins first. But the high priest, it's understood, yes, he's standing there as a man himself, and he has to have an offering for his own sin, but then he also makes another offering, not just for himself, but for everybody else. Right? He is standing in their place. He is serving as this representative. And because the high priest is bearing the names that are engraved upon the stones, the names of the tribes, they are upon his shoulders. He is representing all of the people. And that's one of the amazing things. The vast majority of the people of Israel would never have that kind of direct audience with Adonai. They would never enter into the tabernacle. never go into the holy place around the various items within the tabernacle. But are they still there? Yeah. Because they are counted among the people, because they've not been cut off from the people. They've not been put out of the camp. That's what's so significant about those kinds of statements. That, if you're cut off from your people or you're put outside from the camp, when the high priest is standing there before ADONAI, that means you're not with them when he does that. But because they are counted among the people, they are still entering into ADONAI's presence, because the high priest is bearing them. He is carrying them. He is standing with their name on his shoulders. And again, the importance of that, of understanding that, looking at that, is the things on earth are made after or represent the pattern that is shown to Moses, remember? So all these things that he is being instructed on how to build, he is seeing these things because they are happening in the heavens. What does that say about Messiah and his role as high priest? What does he bear as well upon his shoulders? Does he not carry us, those who trust in him? He represents us. He carries us. He lifts us up into the presence of ADONAI. The high priest, Aaron, he carries them upon his shoulders into God's presence. So while literally they are not there, they are still there because their representative stands there. Same is true. You see this within the lives of the Jewish people in the diaspora. We see this in a couple of different ways. Because not everybody, they are commanded to appear before ADONAI at all of the feast days. We're supposed to make this trip. Not everybody can make the trip to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage feast. So what you see, many times the congregations would send a representative, a stand-in with their congregational offering. And because the one stand-in has gone on their behalf, it's as if the entire congregation is there with them. In Acts, Paul sends representatives to Jerusalem for the synagogues, for various congregations that have made an offering to the poor. He's talking about this in 1 Corinthians. Concerning the collection for the saints, for the Kedoshim, as I directed Messiah's communities in Galatia, you do likewise. So take up an offering. It is on the first day of the week, and we can spend a lot of time talking about that one, right? This is after Shabbat, when the sun has gone down. You want to say this. Oftentimes, this is my little spiel on this. This translation is always used in the time between first fruits and Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks. So it's talking about on one of the Shabbats. Talking about the Shabbat of the counting of the Omer and such. He says, let each of you set something aside, saving up whatever is gained, so no collections take place when I come. Then whenever I arrive, I will send whomever you approve with letters of introduction to carry your gift to Jerusalem. And so the person or persons that they send represent the congregation. And so if even one person goes with their gift, it's as if they have all gone and presented their offering to ADONAI. And I've seen a few things. I couldn't find it the way I wanted to this time to show you, but congregations would try to send a person at least once a year to these events. I believe this is the kind of representation that you see in Zechariah with the survivors from the nations. Where are they supposed to go? For Sukkot. Right? Because all the survivors from the nations that attacked Jerusalem will go up from year to year to worship the King, ADONAI Tzavaot, and to celebrate Sukkot. Furthermore, if any of the nations on earth do not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, ADONAI Tzavaot, they will have no rain. Now, I could be wrong about this, but unless God is doing something completely different from how he does now, and he's certainly capable of doing that, I don't necessarily think that every single survivor from every nation is going to go to Jerusalem. But every nation will have to send a representative, will have to send a delegation to Sukkot to express their loyalty to the king. Right? By sending one or by sending several, the whole nation is represented. That makes sense? It can be, it's one way or the other. Either everybody is all showing up there and he makes a way for everybody on the planet to be there, or they're represented by somebody in their place. The Targums call this moment a special memorial. When you see this in 28:12, this when talking about the high priest, thou shalt fix the two gems upon the shoulders of the ephod to be set for a memorial of righteousness for the sons of Israel. And Aaron shall bear the names of the sons of Israel upon his two shoulders for a memorial. And I find this wording interesting, a memorial of righteousness. It's a memorial for who? Right? The stones aren't righteous because they have the names of the tribes on them. Unless you consider it that what maybe the tribes represent or the stones represent is a call to righteousness for the tribes to uphold. Maybe you can make that point. But they're not righteous because the names are on them. Because so often the tribes are not righteous. So how is that a help when standing before a holy God whose standard is perfect righteousness? No, I believe this is a memorial to God that righteousness has been given to the tribes. Righteousness that covers this representative so the high priest can be in his presence. It's a righteousness that is credited to him. Much like Abraham, and the righteousness was credited to him because of his faith, because of his belief, and it passes on to his descendants. Remember, he believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. So they were continuing in that relationship of faith, just as Paul calls us to in Galatians, that we're supposed to have the same kind of faith as Abraham, believing God. But it was that righteousness bestowed to Abraham and to the high priest by God himself. How did Abraham get it? By looking forward and seeing the day of Messiah and believing in the provision of God. Even Yeshua referred to that in John chapter 8. Abraham looked forward to seeing my day, that he was given a vision or a glimpse of that future. The Targums refer to that again in Genesis 15. And he, talking about Abraham, believed in the Lord and had faith in the Memra, the word of the Lord. Who is that? That's Messiah. That's Yeshua. The Word who was with God, the Word who was God, the Word who became flesh and dwelt among us. He had faith in the word of the Lord, and he reckoned it to him for righteousness. So the source of the righteousness that the high priest is bearing upon his shoulders was that which was given to Abraham because he believed in the word of Adonai. He believed in the provision of Adonai. He believed in the offering that makes many righteous. This verse that I'm about to share uses a different word for bearing, but it has the same kind of idea. It's used 9 times, only 9 times in the Torah, in the Tanakh, but it's talking about a heavy burden. And it shows up twice in Isaiah 53. Surely he has borne, which is the nasa, our griefs, and carried the ball, that's the root of this word, our pains. Yet we esteemed him as stricken, struck by God, and afflicted. Now, in the Hebrew construct, in this thinking of the Jewish world, when they pair two words like that together, what does that mean? These are like synonyms, right? This is like a form of poetry, of rhyming, not necessarily of sound, but rhyming of meaning. So they are words that they pair together in verse 4. Verse 11, he says, "The righteous one, my servant, will make many righteous, and he will sabal their iniquities." He makes many righteous. And the high priest is essentially carrying our burdens and our griefs and our iniquities before Adonai on his shoulders. And where the picture is, the understanding is that we are supposed to come out of that meeting, out of that moment, and emerge with righteousness instead. And if the earthly high priest is a picture of that, or is supposed to accomplish that, how much more the Messiah, who passes through the more perfect tabernacle, the one not made by human hands, that makes us righteous before God, not just for a time, not just for a year, but permanently. That's a beautiful picture, don't you think? He bears us, he carries us into his presence. And we emerge with righteousness. Our names are upon his shoulders. Our names are also over the heart. Again, where the judgments of God are made, where decisions are made, where his will is heard. Again, that's the breastplate. It says Aaron will bear the names of Bnei Israel in the breastplate of judgment on his heart whenever he enters the holy place as a continual memorial before Adonai. There's also, this is where you put the Urim and the Thummim within the breastplate of judgment, so they will be on Aaron's heart when he goes in before Adonai. Aaron will bear the judgment of Bnei Israel on his heart before Adonai continually. And there's a couple of different ways to look at this. Because on one hand, our hearts are deceitfully wicked, right? The high priest is essentially bearing, and in many ways thus exposing, laying bare the hearts to the righteous judgment of God. It's as if you would see those statements of loyalty that would be made by the knights to the king in years past, where they would be before the king and they would take their armor, they would remove the armor, and they would open up their tunics or whatever else and expose their heart. Right? Y'all seen pictures like this before? They would expose their heart and basically saying, look, if the king wants to take my life right now, here it is. That makes sense? You can take this like that, as if saying, my life belongs to the king, and if he wishes to strike my heart, take my life, it is his. Their lives, and all the tribes' lives, are in the hands of the king, and exposed before him to judge as he sees fit. But it's also a memorial. It's a statement there that, yes, they are Adonai's people. Yes, he knows their hearts. And with this that he has provided, this breastplate with the Urim and Thummim, they need to have his will revealed to them so that they could put his word in their hearts. So the breastplate is also asking God to reveal his will in his heart to them, so that all the people can know his will. Not just one man, but with all of their names there. They all know his heart. The breastplate is for that. They need his judgments and will to be made known so they can hide his word in their hearts, so that they may not do what? Sin against him. That they must have these hearts of flesh, obedient to his will, hearts that are made righteous. And the high priest that's in the heavenly tabernacle bears the names of the tribes as well. That the Ancient of Days, sitting on his throne, will always see their names and the promises and the covenant that he made with them. That's all pictured within the breastplate. And then there's also the golden crown. Verse 36, you are to make a plate of pure gold and engrave on it like the engravings of a seal, holy to Adonai. All who believe, Israel and all who believe in Messiah, in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are supposed to be holy, set apart to Adonai, to be holy as he is holy. Are we not? And upon the head, signifies that seat of leadership, that defining, their defining characteristic, their heart, soul, mind, and strength is supposed to be dedicated to him, right? His word is supposed to be put up there. Verse 38 says, it will rest on Aaron's forehead, so that Aaron will bear away the iniquity committed regarding the holy things which Bnei Israel set apart as all their holy gifts. It is to always be on his forehead, so that they may have favor before Adonai. Something really interesting with all of this. They make this golden plate, and they're supposed to be able to tie it or bind it around his head with what? What is it? It's a cord made that looks what? Right? It's a blue or violet cord, right? The techelet. Everything in the tabernacle, everything that has that color, blue or the violet, however it's translated, in the tabernacle uses that word techelet. And it's the same word used in Numbers 15 with the tzitzit, which is the blue cord, right? That's supposed to be in here. The tzitzit are supposed to remind us of the commandments, but they also are essentially, they're supposed to remind us of his commandments. They're also, so that means they connect our head, they turn our head, our mind, our thoughts to the holy things of God, the dedicated things of God. Because are we not also supposed to be dedicated to him? Are we not consecrated to him as his people? Are we not supposed to be connected to the tabernacle and what's happening there? Because he is carrying and bearing our name. So that even this techelet, which we carry around with us, is connected to the techelet at the tabernacle and the role of the high priest and what he is wearing. So the techelet essentially bind us to this function and ensure that we are represented. We're still connected to it. And if there is not an earthly tabernacle, if there's not an earthly temple, does that mean we're disconnected? No. Because there is a tabernacle, there is a treasure in heaven where moth and rust cannot destroy, right? We are still connected to him. And we still have a high priest that is serving on our behalf. The golden crown, it says it's bearing away our iniquity regarding those consecrated things, our offerings. The Targums talk about it in terms of insincere gifts and offerings. But it's our iniquity toward those consecrated things. And again, his people are supposed to be consecrated and set apart. The one wearing this is supposed to bear away that iniquity. And that's something that we desperately need. What do we do if we don't have a high priest here on earth to do this on our behalf? That's a significant and difficult question to answer, unless you understand that Messiah is fulfilling this role on our behalf. And what's interesting with all these different passages that use this same nasa, the same Hebrew word, every time it's translated in the Septuagint, they use a different word. So the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. And even within the same chapter, using the same Hebrew word, they pull out a different Greek word each time. So when they're on the shoulder, it's this one, analambano. The second one, well, that means to take up, to raise up, into the midst of or among. That's very similar. You can see it used in Exodus 19:4, that passage where it's talking about how the Lord bears us on eagle's wings. The second time, when it's dealing with the breastplate over his heart, it uses a related word without the prefix on the front, so it's just lambano, which means to take hold of, to carry, or to lay hands on. This one's the one that shows up in Genesis 22, when they translate that in the Greek, in the Septuagint, where it says he took his son, he took the wood, he took the fire, he took the knife. All throughout that account of the offering of Isaac. That's the word that is used there. This is also the word that's in Philippians chapter 2 in talking about Messiah that Paul uses, where he says he took on the form of a slave, of a servant. Laying aside, not holding on to, not grasping something he already possessed, but laying it aside. The third one, in talking about the head, is the one, I'm not even sure how to pronounce that one. I've tried multiple times. I always get it wrong. But it means to lift up or take away or to remove. And you see that in Deuteronomy 21:9, where it's putting away or removing the guilt of the innocent blood. That's where, if they find someone has been killed, or a body is out there in the field and they don't know what happened to it, the town that's closest to it has to make some kind of offering to say that we were not responsible for this. You see it in Joshua chapter 7, where Achan had taken some of the holy things, and it caused them to be defeated. And until that sin of Achan was removed, they were in a lot of trouble. And the only time it's used in the New Testament is in 1 Corinthians 5, a couple of verses there, where it's talking about getting the sin, removing, expelling the one that is immoral. And all of these words are describing the work of the high priest, and thus Messiah, the great high priest, who bears us into God's presence, who removes our sin and covers us with his righteousness, with our names on his shoulder, over his heart, the crown of holiness on his head to take away our sin. He represents us. He carries us before the throne of God in the same way that the memra, the word, is established over the mercy seat that we talked about last week. And again, we see that kind of language in Hebrews. Therefore, he is also able to save completely those who draw near to God through him, always living to make intercession for them. We are able to draw near to God because he is representing us. For such a Kohen Gadol was fitting for us. One who is holy, guiltless, undefiled, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. He has no need to offer up sacrifices day by day like those other Kohanim, Gadolim, first for their own sins, then for the sins of the people. For when he offered up himself, he did this once for all. That's in there again. Chapter 8, verse 1, it says, "Now here is the main point being said. We do have such a Kohen Gadol, a high priest, who has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. He is a priestly attendant of the holies and the true tent, which ADONAI set up, and not man." Well, his representation of us is ongoing. Chapter 9, verse 11 says, "When Messiah appeared as Kohen Gadol of the good things that have now come, passing through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this creation, he entered into the holies once and for all, not by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood, having obtained eternal redemption." And if he is entering into the holies, what is he carrying with him? What is he bearing with him? The names of the tribes. The names of those who believe. He is wearing the true priestly clothing that Aaron's was patterned after. And he has made eternal redemption and forgiveness possible. We see Peter speak of what this high priest does for us. When the time of judgment is presented and he is laid bare before God's righteousness. 1 Peter chapter 2 says, "When he was abused, he did not return the abuse. When suffering, he made no threats. Instead, he kept entrusting himself to the one who judges righteously. His heart was exposed before him who judges righteously, as he himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, so that we, removed from sins, he bore our sin and he removed them, so that we, removed from sins, might live for righteousness, that memorial of righteousness that is imparted to us. For it is by his wounds you were healed. And by doing so, the servant, the one, has made many righteous." This is a different word for bearing here. This is anphero, to carry or to bring or to lead up, even to bring, to put up on the altar. It's used in a moment where Jesus, Yeshua, he is leading Peter, James, and John up the mountain at his transfiguration. It's used at his ascension in both Luke and Acts, where he is taken up before them. It's used in the Exodus when Moses bore the answers of the people back up the mountain to ADONAI, chapter 19. When they agreed to the covenant and when they were saying, everything ADONAI commands we will do and obey, Moses is the one who bore their answers back up to him. All of this, the high priest, Yeshua, has done for us. Everything about his coming and his ministry is right here, even in just the clothes and the outfits that the high priest is wearing, in the description of those things, that our names are borne and carried into God's presence and laid before him. Our sins are removed, and righteousness, the righteousness of Messiah, is what he sees. And so because of all of that, we have to keep entrusting ourselves to the one who judges righteously. In everything, we trust in him because he has made the way into his presence. He has carried us and brought us there and makes it possible for us to be redeemed.